Kia ora friends, welcome back to my studio. I'm Gina, and in today's video I'm wanting to experiment a little bit more with some polymer clay. I have in mind to create another book nook, and it will be a street scene from Tunisia, which is Sidi Bou Said. And I visited there many years ago and took this picture of the shop that's outside, and there's lots of different decorative plates that I'm wanting to recreate out of polymer clay. Before I dive in and create my own designs, I'm going to follow a tutorial by Clayzoo, and I'll put the link in the description below, just to give me an idea of how the clay kind of fits together and how to create a cane, which is actually what I'm going to be creating today. So let's get started. For the first plate and design, I'm going to be using blue and white clay only, so that's what I'm going to be using for this design, and I'm pretty much going to follow the tutorial exactly. So with the tutorial, what I'm trying to do is have a look to see how the clay kind of comes together. What sort of patterns do you need to create to get the look of the plate? It feels a little bit more like a kaleidoscope type of pattern and design, and I'm just kind of having a look to see how big does a pattern need to be in order for it to come out, and what sort of tips and tricks can I be picking up so that I can use in my own design. I'm using this as a way to teach myself by following somebody who knows what they're doing. One thing I just wanted to point out is that as I was prepping my work surface, I actually cut my thumb on one of these sharp slicing tools. As I was sort of moving it across my board, I just picked it up in the wrong way and just cut the pad of my thumb, that really soft part. Anyway, I have put a sticking plaster on it just to make sure that everything's all kept nice and clean, but in order to stop all the indentations of the random sticking plaster in the clay, I've just got a glove on. So that's the reason for the glove. So I'm just going to continue on shaping up the clay, creating all these different shapes that are going to come together in the end to create plate. Actually, one thing I have got is a pasta maker. I did invest in buying that. It cost me all of $25. It was a nice little cheaper version, so I thought, well, if it doesn't work, it doesn't really matter. And actually that was a godsend for most of these projects, because it allowed me to roll out some really nice flat pieces of clay. So all the pieces that I'm putting together are starting to form a triangle shape. So the reason for that is for this particular plate, what we're trying to do is create a bit of a repeatable pattern, and one that we can sort of mirror around kind of in a kaleidoscope effect. And what we're trying to do is create something that can be stretched out and then cut down into some smaller pieces and put round into a plate design, or into a circle design, which therefore becomes a plate. One of the things I realized as I was building out this particular first part of the cane is that it's really important to keep the shape. The original shape had a right angle, and then it had a long piece of the triangle, so a right angle triangle, and by the time I'd stretched out the cane, it really was more of an even-sided triangle. And even worse, I'd actually pinched in the middle part of the triangle, so each of the sides sort of concaved out, which doesn't seem like such a big deal until I start putting them together, and then there's gaps in the middle of where they kind of join. Luckily this was only the first part of the cane, and as I stretched out the next part it actually helped bring the whole thing together. But still, these were things that I'm learning and picking up along the way that's ultimately going to help when I come to the end to create my own design. One of the things I'm going to use to shape the clay into a bowl is some marbles. So I'm just going to press the clay around the marbles and get it as even as possible around the rim, and using a slightly smaller piece of clay, pushing that into the bottom to add the little base. And then I'm going to pop it in the oven to bake. Once it comes out of the oven, it's just very easy to pop off the marble, and it creates a lovely little shape, and it's got slightly glossy on the inside. So I'm really happy with how these have turned out so far. The little ones with the decorative pattern actually ended up turning out really well. It was a little bit harder than what I initially thought it would be. The main challenge is trying to make sure that the pattern doesn't warp as the cane is being stretched out. One trick that I learnt was to put the cane in the freezer and just to firm up the clay again, and then that allowed me to cut it a lot easier rather than as I'm cutting it, it flattened. I did create another one last night just as I was pottering around, and this one has a little bit more of a mosaic pattern. Started off with some smaller canes and then cut those into 1 centimeter pieces and put them all together, and when it got to the actual stretching out the cane size, it looked really good. But one thing I found is that size really does matter, because when the actual cane came out to being completed, the little mosaic pattern is almost unrecognizable because it's so tiny. So there's been a couple of things that I've learnt, making sure that the pattern in the cane is large enough so that when it does shrink down you can actually see what it is. Freezing up the cane before it's cut. I like using the marbles worked really well, so now I'm keen to give some more of it a go. For the third bowl, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use up a bit of clay that I've already got. I had some green that I created and a blue, and what I've done here is just create a gradient with the clay, just using the pasta roller. And now I'm just going to cut this down. Now I'm using this as another tutorial from Clay Zoo, so I'll put that link in the description below as well. And for this particular one, what I was trying to have a look at was how simple can I make the design to bring the biggest impact, because this cane is really simple in design, but it creates quite a lot of impact because it's actually mirrored and duplicated in a slightly different way than the other one, which was more in a plate sort of style. So I was really keen to see how this one would come together. Now this is the moment of truth, and I'm really happy with how this has turned out. For something really simple, the impact is pretty cool. And I'm just going to follow the same step as I've done for the other 2 plates and use the marbles to actually shape them. As I'm sort of starting to do a few of these, they're getting a little bit neater and neater, which is great. It's always good to see progress whereas you're learning something completely new. One thing with this particular one, that the cane didn't quite stick together, but I think that's because it was put into the freezer. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to take everything that I've learned out of all 3 plates and I'm going to create my own version. So I'm going to start off with some smaller canes. So I'm basically using up all the leftover colours of clay that I've got, as well as adding in some brown and some red. So I'm just creating these smaller canes to create sort of a little bit more of a mosaic effect, and then I'm going to follow a very similar step to the first plate and create that triangular shape into a wedge and then build that out from there. So here we go, it's another moment of truth, and I am pretty happy with how this one's turned out. And again, I'm going to shape it with marbles and pop it in the oven to bake. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, it really does help the channel. Have a fabulous week everybody, and until next week, I'll see you then. Bye for now.